So here's an example of invoking the Meetup API in JavaScript. Let me see if I can find the call. Make sure I'm in the right place. As I said, this is not my call. Here we go. Get upcoming meetings. So here's the API call that we want to make in our app. Right? It's just a URL. And we're setting up the parameters. And this is the built-in, you could use jQuery to do this, use an AJAX call. But if you're using the WinRT JavaScript libraries, you can just use winjs.xhr. You give it the URL, the response type, and then, of course, what code follows is the code that is going to deal with the response. So you can see we're just dropping into a for each loop, and then we're just gathering the he's just gathering the information about each of the meetups, and he's putting it into the right collections that will be bound to the UI controls. It's exactly the same pattern that we did in C# and XAML, but this is just using HTML5 controls, CSS, and JavaScript to do the implementation. If I go ahead and run this, there we go. So he's gotten back meetups near Boston filtered by keyword JavaScript. And if I click on one of these, he gives me a nice map. And he's also going out and he's using, this is a feature of Bing Maps. So he's done a mashup between Meetup and Bing. And so the Bing map is showing you all of the coffee shops that are near where the meetup is happening. All right? And so Bing has a points of interest API. So once you have the geolocation of the meetup, Meetup will give you a longitude, latitude for the meetup. You can use that with Bing to say, give me back a list of points of interest. And so that's the mashup he's doing here. So again, interesting data makes for interesting applications. And the last thing I'll show you before I go into the last part of the talk here is that same pattern, same capability is available on Windows Phone. As I told you, I did an implementation for Edmunds with car data. So that's what this application's doing. It's going to go out to Edmunds. It's going to get first a list of makes, Acura, Aston Martin, Audi, and so on. And if I'm interested in Audis, I can click that, and I'll get a list of the models. So that came back from Edmunds. And I say, I'm interested in an A8. It's then going to show me, hopefully it'll go back out to Edmunds and get me the images of an Audi A8. So I can salivate over them. My ultimate goal is to start a transportation business like Jason Statham. That's just a dream of mine, be a transporter. So anyway, you have to know that movie, I guess, to get the joke. No problem. So we have the same capability on Windows Phone. Any questions? Very good. So this is just a visual of that pattern that I talked about. We invoke the API. It's an asynchronous call. That's also important. These calls you make to these open data APIs, and we fully support an asynchronous model on the phone and on Windows. It's an asynchronous call. That means the user is not waiting for that call to return. They can keep using your app. They can go use another app. And then when the call returns, your application will be notified. That's where you'll do the deserialization if necessary, copy to the view model, and then bind to the UI. And we did all of that. So now I'm just going to dive into this cross-platform app development landscape discussion. For C# developers, this is one of the best options you have out there for cross-platform support for iOS, for Android, for Windows, is with the tools and the frameworks from Xamarin. They're actually they're headquartered here in Harvard Square. The founder of this company is Miguel de Icaza. He, many years ago, when Microsoft open sourced the .NET framework and the C# language and standardized it, he took that and he created that implementation for Linux. And so he's been making his living building cross-platform tools and libraries based on C# and the .NET framework for, it's got to be 10 or 12 years now. And the latest incarnation is Xamarin, and they provide a cross-platform framework for targeting, all the mobile platforms. And the nice thing here is, to our discussion earlier, you can get 60, 70% code reuse. Their model is, port the business logic, the cloud integration, the database access. That's portable. But do your user interface natively for each, because there's no substitute for a native UI. There just isn't. This has been something we've been trying to solve in computer science for many years. You can go back to the 80s. There were companies that were trying to spin up cross-platform UI frameworks and tools, and they began to be called, they were referred to as least common denominator, or LCD, which meant they were the poorest implementation on every platform they ran on. All right? So that's not where you want to be. You don't want to be least common denominator. You want your app to sing and to just be the most fantastic experience on whatever mobile device it's on. But at the same time, if you want to have the furthest reach, the most opportunity for downloads and for monetization and all of that, you want to be on as many mobile platforms as possible. So you need a strategy. It might be native on each platform. That's a strategy. Could be cross-platform with something like Xamarin, which means you're going to develop in C#, and you can actually do debugging in Visual Studio for Android and for Apple and for Windows. So it's a great development experience. They've got a great product here. A lot of applications are beginning to take advantage of that. Earlier stated, your HTML5 developer, PhoneGap, fantastic option for a cross-platform solution. All right? If you're a game developer, Unity just released their Windows 8 Windows Phone support for Unity. So you can now, take your, we're actually told by Unity that about half the games in the iOS store are built with Unity. So we know there's a lot of Unity developers out there. It's a great tool. It's on the high end, but under the covers, it's C#. It's actually using the cross-platform implementation of C# that Miguel de Icaza designed years ago. So it's called the Mono framework. And so you can build games that target all the platforms. There's another framework. This one's very interesting. It's called Mono Game. Again, same community. You can see there's kind of a, in the C# world, if you want to go cross-platform, you're working in what's called Mono. So it's Mono Game, or it's the Mono framework, which is used by Unity, or it's Xamarin, which is using Mono in its implementation. So it's having a lot of impact. Mono Game is a cross-platform implementation of Microsoft's XNA framework. So if you're familiar with building games for Xbox or for Windows or Windows Phone, the framework was called XNA. The cross-platform version of that is Mono Game. And there are games like Armed that are in the Windows 8 store that are built on Mono Game. I built one myself and put it in the store. Works incredibly well. It's very straightforward way of doing game development, and it supports Android and iOS and Xbox and Windows and you name it. If you're an HTML developer and you're a game developer, you might want to look at something like Game Maker Studio from Yo-Yo Games. So this is a cross-platform game development tool. It will generate HTML5 and JavaScript and allow you to target all the different mobile platforms. There's another one like that that's called Construct 2 from a company called Skira. We actually use this in all of our game workshops with students and professionals. We use Construct 2. That's because the free version is very, very powerful, and you can publish to Windows Phone and to Windows 8 with their free edition. You have to understand that each one of these tools I'm showing you has a cost to it. This one, what's nice about it is no cost for targeting Windows, at least. If you get into iOS and Android, then there may be a cost to getting that